So, you want to buy an Amish farm. You picture 100 acres of green Lancaster County fields, a white farmhouse with a hand pump at the kitchen sink, a red barn packed with hay. You imagine a life of honest work, low overhead, and no utility bills to pay. You think you are about to buy a cheap piece of the pastoral dream. The first number ends the fantasy. That 100-acre farm will cost you $600,000. In cash. Not financed, not mortgaged. Cash. Because no bank in America will write a loan on a property with no heating system, no connection to the electrical grid, and no indoor plumbing. And here is the strange part. $600,000 is only about 1/3 of what a comparable modern farm would cost. You would think a discount that steep is a bargain. It is not. It is a liquidity trap. The price is low because your money goes in and it cannot easily come back out. But let us say none of that scares you. You have the cash sitting in an account, ready to wire. Good. Money is only the first gate, and it is the easiest one you will face. Because the next problem is not the price, it is the seller. Amish farms almost never appear on the open market. When one does, the listing lasts an average of less than a single week, and the buyer is almost never an outsider. It is another Amish family who already has the cash in hand, pulled from a church aid fund or borrowed at zero interest from a relative. You are not competing with a motivated seller who needs your check. You are competing with a closed financial system that moves faster than any bank you could call. This is not a small effect. It has been reshaping the county for decades. A sociologist named Conrad Kanagi tracked farm sales in Lancaster County for 20 years. He found that between 1984 and 1995, the Amish gained a net of 137 farms. Everyone else lost farms. The Amish were the only group growing, and they were not buying from each other. They were buying from English sellers who did not understand what they were sitting on. Today, the Amish own close to 40% of every farm larger than 25 acres in that county. So when you go looking for land, you are not one buyer against one seller. You are one outsider against an entire religious economy that does not need a mortgage. Now suppose you find a farm listed by a non-Amish owner, someone outside that network. You still are not clear. Because now you face the inspection. A conventional home appraiser walks the property and flags it as unlivable. No heating system, no electrical service, no approved septic. The appraisal comes back at roughly half the asking price, because on paper the house barely qualifies as a house. The seller refuses to drop that far. The deal dies at the closing table. So the only way to actually buy is with cash and a waiver. You sign a document stating that you accept the property as is, with full knowledge that it has no utilities. And that waiver does two things to you. First, it kills your ability to sue anyone later when you discover what is wrong. Second, it kills your ability to get a renovation loan, because a lender will not touch a property you have already agreed to buy blind. You are now a cash-only buyer, holding an asset that no bank will finance. And even having the cash does not mean you are allowed in. The Amish community runs its own real estate market through a network of informal agents who never list a single property on the multiple listing service. They hear about a farm before it ever goes public. They bring a buyer with cash in hand before you even see a sign at the end of the driveway. By the time you call the number on a for sale post, the deal has usually already closed. You are not buying a farm. You are trying to intercept a transaction that happens entirely inside an economy that does not want you in it. Let us say you beat all of that. You found a seller outside the network. You paid cash. You signed the waiver. You own the deed. Now you have to live on it. And this is where the real cost begins. The farmhouse has no modern plumbing and no central heating. The previous owners stripped every foot of electrical wiring out of the walls before they left. Your $600,000 asset is a shell with a hand pump and a wood stove. So you start making calls. You call a contractor to install a septic system. The estimate comes back at $15,000 at a minimum, and that is before he tells you the well is 300 feet deep and needs a new pump. You call an electrician to run wire through the walls. He tells you the house was built with structural insulated panels. That means every single wire chase has to be cut by hand. The labor cost triples on the spot. Then you sit down and actually add up what it takes to make this place function. Solar panels, a battery bank, a propane refrigerator, a propane stove, a water heater, a working bathroom. You are now at $80,000 in renovation costs before you have planted a single seed in the ground. This is the moment the discount finally makes sense. That one-third price you thought was a bargain was never a bargain. It was a prepayment. The seller did not just sell you a farm. He sold you a liability that no conventional buyer would touch, and he priced in exactly the infrastructure you now have to build yourself. And here is the trap you could not see coming. The same bank that will not finance the purchase will not finance the renovation either. No lender issues a construction loan on a property with no electrical service and no approved septic. So you are not a homeowner with a project. You are a self-funded general contractor working on a timeline that has no end and no backstop. You have the money. You have the deed. You now have a very large hole in the ground where your savings used to be, but you still do not have a working farm. Because the thing that actually makes an Amish farm run is not something you can buy at any price. It is something the seller was born into, and you were not. You hold the deed. You paid cash. You own the land, but you do not own the rules. Every Amish community lives under a set of church regulations called the Ordnung. This is not a friendly suggestion or a cultural tradition. It is a binding code that governs what a member is allowed to do, including what they can do on their own property. Now, you are not a baptized member, so technically the Ordnung does not bind you, but your neighbors are bound by it, and their rules become your reality, whether you signed anything or not. Here is the problem you cannot escape. The Ordnung prohibits high-line electricity, telephones inside the home, central heating systems, automobiles, and tractors with pneumatic tires, which means your Amish neighbors will not connect to your power grid. They will not buy produce grown with chemical fertilizer. They will not do business with anyone who sells goods on a Sunday. And that matters far more than it sounds, because the Amish control the entire local supply chain. They own the produce auctions. They own the feed stores. They own the equipment fabricators and the hauling services. If the community decides you are a disruptive outsider, they simply stop trading with you. And the moment they do, your farm becomes a stranded asset in the middle of an economy you cannot access. If you think that pressure only lands on outsiders, consider what it does to their own. There was a man named Henry Zook, an ambitious Amish farmer who built a construction business, a sawmill, a cattle operation, and a dairy herd all at once. He became too successful. His growing wealth and independence made him a target of church criticism, and the community pressured him steadily until he sold his farm and left. He owned the land outright. What he did not own was permission to stay. And if the community can push out one of its own members over ambition, understand clearly what it can do to you. So, the real asset on an Amish farm was never the soil. It is the community's willingness to work with you, and that willingness is not for sale. The Ordnung does not just limit your technology, it limits your workforce, and this is where the economics quietly break. Amish labor is the engine that makes these farms profitable, and it runs on terms you cannot match. Children begin doing real work at age 6. Teenagers handle 1,000-pound wagons and teams of draft horses. A single Amish family can run a dairy of 50 cows with no hired help from outside the community at all. You cannot replicate that. Your labor will cost at least twice as much per hour, and you will still have to find people willing to milk cows by hand at 4 in the morning, every morning, for a wage. Then there is the equipment. You cannot simply buy a new tractor. In most settlements, the Ordnung forbids rubber tires on tractors, so your neighbors run steel-wheeled machines pulled by horses, or custom hydraulic systems built by local Amish shops. Those shops will not sell to you because you are not a church member, which leaves you buying antique equipment at auction, repairing it yourself, and praying it survives one more season. The real control the community holds over you is not what you are allowed to do. It is what you are allowed to buy. So now you own the deed, the Ordnung owns the rules, and the community owns the supply chain. The obvious question becomes whether this farm can still pay you back. Let us look at the money. The gross revenue number is the first trap, because it looks wonderful. A well-run 80-acre Amish dairy, with 40 cows and a few acres of tobacco, can bring in $125,000 in gross annual income. That figure appeared in a New York Times article back in 1986, and it still gets quoted today because it sounds like proof the whole model works. But that is gross revenue. The real question is, what survives after the costs? And this is where the Amish farm quietly cheats the math in a way you never can. The Amish family running that farm spends somewhere between $6,000 and $8,000 a year on food, clothing, and housing for a family of 8. That is not an operating expense. That is a lifestyle subsidy so deep that no accountant would believe it. You will not have that subsidy. Your personal cost of living will be 4 to 5 times higher before you buy your first bag of feed. Now stack up the farm expenses themselves: seeds, fertilizer, feed for 40 cows, veterinary care, fuel for the diesel engine that runs the milk cooler, repairs for horse-drawn equipment, property taxes, and the cost of hauling your milk to a processing plant. The United States Department of Agriculture has studied farms this size. Most small family farms with gross cash income below $350,000 run an operating profit margin of less than 10%. Many of them do not turn a profit at all. They operate at a net loss. So why does the Amish farm survive when the numbers say it should not? Because the family works for free. The children work for free. The grandparents contribute labor into their 70s and 80s for free. Nobody draws a salary. Nobody pays for workers' compensation insurance. Nobody pays for health insurance. And when disaster strikes, the church aid fund covers catastrophic losses at a small fraction of what a commercial policy would charge. You cannot copy a single line of that cost structure. You will pay wages. You will pay insurance. You will pay for a truck to haul your milk, because you cannot exactly take a horse and buggy to the processing plant. The revenue looks like a comfortable living. The profit is the problem. And the profit gap is wide enough to swallow your entire investment. It gets worse, because you are also exposed to a force the Amish farm barely survives itself: regulation. Back in 1977, Indiana introduced new rules requiring dairy farmers to cool fresh milk to 50 degrees Fahrenheit within 2 hours of milking. The new rule forced investments in modern equipment that the Amish church had flatly banned. Many Amish dairy farmers in Indiana lost their economic footing overnight, caught between the regulator and the Ordnung. The regulator, in effect, became the real owner of whether that farm could survive. That same pressure lands on you, except you have no exemption to hide behind. Every health regulation, every zoning change, every environmental compliance cost drops directly onto your profit statement. The Amish farm can absorb those shocks because it carries no debt service, no payroll tax, and no insurance premiums. You carry all three. On your farm, revenue is not profit, and the gap between them is where your money disappears. Now, if you walk onto almost any Amish farm, you will see the obvious revenue streams: the milk cows, a few acres of tobacco, a roadside stand selling sweet corn and tomatoes. But here is what most buyers never realize. The farm itself is often a front for something else. The actual profit center is usually a small manufacturing business, hidden in the barn or tucked into the basement. A researcher named Donald Craybill documented this shift in his book Amish Enterprise. He found that Amish farmers increasingly rely on sideline businesses just to keep the land. A dairy farmer might also run a furniture shop. A produce grower might operate a harness repair service on the side. The farm feeds the family. The shop pays the land note. And that is the part outsiders completely misread. Because when you buy the farm, you are not buying that business. That business has no brand you can inherit, no website, no customer list. It runs entirely on the owner's personal reputation inside a closed community. The day he leaves, his customers vanish with him. You have bought the barn where the money used to be made, and none of the reason it was made there. And underneath all of it sits a hidden loss that you cannot buy your way out of. The Amish do not carry commercial insurance. Pennsylvania law grants them a religious exemption that lets Amish employers skip workers' compensation coverage entirely, a fact a Lancaster workers' compensation attorney documented back in 2018. Amish businesses simply do not purchase the policies that every other business in America is legally required to carry. You cannot claim that exemption. You are not Amish. So you will need workers' compensation insurance, general liability insurance, product liability insurance, and property insurance. All of it. On a farm with no electrical system, no modern fire suppression, and no compliance with standard building codes. Your annual premium will run into the thousands. Your coverage will be riddled with exclusions. And the loss bleeds out of you every single year you hold the deed. Because the farm was never built to be insurable in the first place. You have heard the theory. Now meet the men who lived it. Because this is not a story about what might happen. It has already happened, in public, with federal agents on the ground. Amos Miller ran Miller's Organic Farm in Bird in Hand, Pennsylvania, for nearly 30 years. He sold raw milk, grass-fed beef, and pasture-raised eggs to a devoted customer base. His farm was certified organic. His methods were traditional. His community trusted him completely. The United States government did not. In 2016, the Food and Drug Administration traced a listeria outbreak back to raw milk from Miller's farm. One person in Florida died, another in California fell seriously ill. The Centers for Disease Control confirmed the link. And that single event changed everything about how the government saw him. Miller refused to obtain a Pennsylvania raw milk permit. He argued that his farm operated as a private membership association, that his customers had signed contracts indemnifying him from liability, and that this structure placed him outside federal jurisdiction. It was a clever theory. The government disagreed. A federal judge ordered him to cease all meat sales, and in March of 2022, armed United States Marshals entered his property using force. A court-appointed expert inventoried every piece of meat on the farm. Federal inspectors now return every few months to make sure no sales have resumed. And the risk is not limited to milk. In January of 2022, agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives executed an enforcement operation at Cattail Foundry, an Amish farm in Lancaster County. The owner, Reuben King, admitted selling firearms without a federal license. He told investigators he mostly sold long guns to fellow Amish for hunting, and he said he had no idea how the agency had even found him. No criminal charges were filed in the end. But the guns were seized. The business was disrupted. The ownership was damaged. Here is why both of those stories are about you and not about them. You cannot claim the religious exemption that shields an Amish farmer. You cannot argue private membership association status when your name is on the deed and your face is on a driver's license. The regulator does not care about your version of the pastoral fantasy. It cares about compliance. And compliance is expensive, ongoing, and never optional. Then there is Joe Lapp, whose case is documented in the Washington and Lee Law Review. Lapp owned a large egg farm with 2 chicken houses valued at $170,000. Both houses burned to the ground. Lapp carried $245,000 in coverage through the Amish Aid Plan, and he had increased that coverage just 1 month before the fire. The fire marshals investigated. They found he had also quietly obtained additional coverage from a non-Amish insurance agency. For months after the fire, Lapp tried to sell his farm and his egg business. There were no buyers. The insurance money did not save him. The business did not survive. Now ask what happens when that is you. You cannot join the Amish Aid Plan because you are not a church member. You have to buy commercial insurance from a standard carrier. That carrier inspects the property, finds no electrical system, no modern fire suppression, and no building code compliance, and prices you accordingly. Your premium is high, your coverage is thin, and if a real loss ever comes, you face the exact outcome Lapp faced. The payout will not be enough, and the farm will not sell. The risk on this property is never visible from the road. It lives in the soil, in the water, and in the silence of an operation that was never built to modern standards. Start with the well. An Amish farm in the snowbelt might depend on a single well drilled 300 feet down. If that well fails, you are not merely inconvenienced. You are out of a dairy business. A cow drinks roughly 30 gallons of water a day, so a herd of 40 cows needs 1,200 gallons every single day. Lose the well, and your livestock is dead in under a week. Then the septic. A buyer in upstate New York described on a farming forum that simply updating the sewage and water systems on a small Amish farm cost him over $15,000. That is not a renovation you can skip. It is a requirement. The previous owner had no modern plumbing, and you cannot run a commercial farm without it. Then the risk nobody mentions at the closing table. The manure lagoon. Amish farms accumulate animal waste in pits and piles that were never engineered to modern environmental standards. A single overflow during a spring thaw can contaminate a neighbor's well. The neighbor sues. The county inspects. The fine can climb into the tens of thousands of dollars. And you cannot push that cost back onto the seller, because the seller is long gone. The liability transferred to you the moment the deed did. And the most catastrophic risk of all is the one your insurance is designed to reject. In 2015, an Iowa Supreme Court case involved an Amish-owned business called Amish Connection, and its insurer, State Farm. A drainage pipe failed during a rainstorm and water damaged the interior of a commercial suite. State Farm denied the claim, arguing the loss was caused by rain, which the policy excluded. The court agreed with the insurer. The business was left holding the entire cost of the damage. Your policy will carry the same exclusions. And your farm, with its aging pipes and improvised systems, will carry the same vulnerabilities. There is one more layer, and it is the one that turns an inherited property into an active legal exposure. That Lancaster workers' compensation attorney documented it plainly. Pennsylvania grants Amish employers a religious exemption from carrying workers' compensation, and they are even exempt from certain Department of Labor safety rules, including requirements around hard hats. That exemption does not travel with the land. The day you buy the farm and hire even a single non-Amish employee, the exemption vanishes. You must carry workers' compensation. You must meet every safety regulation. You must hold commercial liability insurance. And here is the trap inside that. The seller operated for decades without any of those protections. So the barn has no fire suppression. The equipment has no safety guards. The well has no permit history. You are inheriting the physical infrastructure of an exempt operation, and then you are being forced to run it under fully regulated conditions. Retrofitting a single barn to meet modern fire code can cost more than $50,000. Bringing a dairy into compliance with the pasteurized milk ordinance can cost more than $100,000. These are not upgrades you choose. They are legal requirements you must satisfy before you sell your first gallon of anything. And if you decide to skip them and operate anyway, you have already seen where that road ends. Armed federal agents, a frozen inventory, a business that no longer functions. So suppose you survive all of it. You have poured in the cash, built the infrastructure, absorbed the regulations, and somehow kept the farm running. At some point, you will want out. And the exit is the final trap, because getting out cleanly is harder than getting in. Look at who could possibly buy this place from you. A typical Amish farm has no grid connection, no central heating, and only limited plumbing, which instantly eliminates the vast majority of ordinary buyers. That same buyer from upstate New York noted on a forum called Tractor by Net that Amish farms in his area sell for roughly 1/3 the price of a comparable English farm. And the reason is simple. No bank will write a mortgage on a property that cannot pass a standard appraisal. So your buyer pool is small before you even list. And it is shrinking. The Young Center at Elizabethtown College reports that in some communities, fewer than 10% of Amish households now earn their primary income from farming. The traditional buyer, an Amish family hungry for land, is walking away from agriculture. Which leaves the non-Amish buyer. He takes one look at the tens of thousands of dollars in electrical, plumbing, and septic work required just to make the place habitable. Then he discounts your price for every missing utility. You might think a specialty angle saves you. A certified organic Amish farm in Wisconsin was listed at just under $600,000, while a comparable non-organic farm nearby sold for far less. The organic certification does add value, but it expires the moment you can no longer afford the inspections and the compliance costs to maintain it, and then it is worth nothing. The exit multiple is simply not in your favor. You are trying to sell a business that demands specialized knowledge, a workforce you cannot legally hire on the same terms, and infrastructure that matches nobody's modern expectations. Your only buyers are an Amish family with limited cash or a wealthy hobbyist who will discount you to the floor. You did not buy an asset that appreciates. You bought a liability whose market narrows a little more every year. So what is this business really, once you strip away the white farmhouse and the red barn and the fields? It is not a farm. It is not a lifestyle. It is a liability absorption machine that only produces positive cash flow when it is run by a workforce you cannot hire, under exemptions you cannot claim. The visible business, the land and the livestock and the produce stand, is exactly what you saw in the listing and exactly what you imagined owning. The real engine was always somewhere else. It was the unpaid family labor. It was the church aid fund standing in for insurance. It was the community lending network handing out capital at zero interest. It was the religious exemption erasing workers' compensation, liability coverage, and safety compliance from the books. And every single one of those advantages disappears the instant you sign the deed. You cannot inherit unpaid labor. You cannot join the church aid fund. You cannot claim the religious exemption. You cannot borrow from the community network. What you inherit is only the physical shell that was designed around all of it. The barn with no fire suppression, the equipment with no safety guards, the well with no permit, the dairy that never once met modern pasteurization standards. The profit the previous owner earned was never a function of the soil or the cows. It was a function of his exemption from the cost structure that applies to everyone who is not Amish. So you do not get to buy his profit. You only get to buy his cost structure, without his exemption to survive it. That is the whole business, finally seen clearly. The asset was never the farm. The exemption was the asset. and the exemption is the one thing that does not come with the deed.